Okie doke. All right, so we've got a quorum now. We're just waiting on a couple of others, I think. But I'll open our council meeting for the 21st of September and just acknowledge that we are meeting via Zoom, and this meeting is being recorded and it is being live streamed at the moment via our YouTube channel. We have apologies, General Manager from Deputy Lord Mayor and
Councillor Harvey, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Harvey. Okay, are there any other apologies that we're aware of? At the moment, Councillor Ewan hasn't joined us, but we aren't, she hasn't provided an apology. So we'll just see how we go with that. They might join later. Okay, so I'd like to, as we always do, first of all, start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which the City of Hobart was built, and acknowledge the contemporary Aboriginal community, the Palawa people of Tasmania, and acknowledge that they have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and rights. I'd like if someone could move by raising your hand, as we normally do, confirmation of the minutes from our 7th of September meeting. Moved by Alderman Brackus, seconded by Alderman Briscoe. Is there anyone who'd like to vote against those minutes being accepted? There being none, I will move on to item 2, transfer of agenda items. So we don't have many agenda items anyway, but would anyone like to move any of those into another part of the agenda? No? Okay, we'll move on. We don't have communications from the chair or council workshops. Any notification of those? Is there any, Councillor Ewan has joined us. Is there any public question time? Any questions, gentlemen?
No, Lord Mayor.
Okay, and any petitions?
Yes, Lord Mayor, I do have one petition. Would you care for me to read it?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It reads, we are residents of Ridgeway who love the rural character of the place we live. We are concerned that this rural character is being eroded by council planning decisions that do not sufficiently adhere to the provisions laid out in the rural living zone section of the planning scheme. With this petition, we request that the Hobart City Council ensure that when considering future development applications, the objectives of the rural living zone be closely adhered to. And it goes on, Lord Mayor, to particularise the rural living zone provisions. It has 40 signatures, Lord Mayor. Okay,
would someone like to move that is received and sent to perhaps the Planning Committee for some further discussion and investigation? That's moved by Councillor Dutta, seconded by Councillor Ewan. Would anyone like to vote against that action? Okay, no objections to that. That's passed unanimously. Supplementary items, I'm not sure that we have any, General Manager, no. Item 8 is indications of pecuniary or conflicts of interest. Would anyone like to declare any of those for the open agenda? So no raised hands. We'll move on now. We are acting now, we're moving into the City Planning Committee, so we are now acting as a planning authority. And Deputy Lord Mayor is away, so I'm not sure if someone else is able to just introduce the committee's findings for 9.1, 23 Commercial Road. Alderman Brackus.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think I intend to play backup for the Planning Committee when the Deputy Lord Mayor is unavailable too, so I'm happy to do it right now. I'll introduce item 9.1. 23 Commercial Road, North Hobart, and the item is that the council approved application for partial demolition, alterations, extension, new building for educational and occasional care use and associated works. This was one that was quite rigorously discussed in the Planning Committee last week. The main issue being the impact of traffic and parking in the area. I think everyone's well aware that broadly the North Hobart that area in North Hobart is undergoing some level of strain, and that was an issue of some focus by the committee. Ultimately, though, the majority did support the council recommendation to approve it. So we'll hope that the impact is minimal, and I'll move the item.
It's been seconded by Alderman Briscoe. Would anyone like to speak on this? Oh, Alderman Briscoe, did you want to speak on it?
Just very briefly, the acting chair of planning indicated there was a fair bit of discussion in the planning committee to do with traffic and parking, and we've sent that part of it to the infrastructure committee for discussion with the residents of that area. So I think the concerns are real. We all understand that there are parking issues in North Hobart, although there's some dispute whether there is or not, but I think many of us believe there is, and this is confirmed by the residents. So the infrastructure committee will consider what we can do with parking and traffic in the area. It's a redevelopment of the old gym into classrooms and rooms, and a brand new gym to satisfy the needs of that college or that school. So if we can't reject it on planning grounds. There are issues with planning and parking, as I said, but I think overall we have to approve it. Thanks.
Okay, further discussion. I've got, if you could just pop your hands down, Alderman Brackus and Alderman Briscoe. Is there any further discussion on this item? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I want to begin by saying that most of us as elected members are aware that under the acceptable solution, on all grounds, it failed. But those who listen to the meeting, the public out there, are not aware of the matters pertaining to this in any detail. So for me, I am of the view that there are three issues that under the planning scheme stands out and creates great concern. Firstly, when I take this application and put it under the performance criteria, there is definitely the problem of parking, to which most of us agree. The facts with regards to this, we're told that none of the facts have changed because the students will still be 560, the staff will be 114, and so forth. But when we look at this particular development application, everything is not the same because there is, fact one, a reduction of parking of about 3 car spaces. The opening hours have been suggested or proposed to be somewhat different. Therefore, when I look at this under clause E661P1, which states the number of on-site car parking must be sufficient to meet the reasonable needs of users, having regard to all of the following. A, car parking demand. And no doubt we all agree that there is a huge demand in North Hobart. On the airwaves recently, I've heard elected members speaking about this particular issue. There's so many other residents who complain about this issue in North Hobart. The other element of this particular clause, B, states that the availability on street parking in the locality, there is a great demand again. There isn't sufficient parking spaces provided. It is my understanding that the requirement for parking is about 96, and the school has provided 48 parking spaces, and the council has provided about 29 off-street car parking. So therefore, it gives us about 77. There's still about 20 car spaces short. And this really compounds the problem for the residents living there. And they're having great difficulty, and there have been some fights or conflicts, and police had been involved in this particular matter. So I think this is a matter of clause 661 under development scheme that I think is not being satisfied. Secondly, the site distance also is of concern. E564P1 states the element F, any measures to improve or maintain site distance. In fact, there hasn't been any improvements with regards to this particular element or the test. And G of that particular clause also states that any written advice received from the road authority. We have not received, it is my understanding, any advice from the road authority. And therefore, the impact of any accident can be quite crucial and detrimental. And thirdly, I think the hours of operation under clause D1131P1, it states that hours of operation must not have an unreasonable impact through noise or other emissions that are unreasonable in
30 seconds, Lord Mayor.
unreasonable in timing, duration. I believe that there is it is going to be unreasonably impacting on the residents, because noise is an environmental nuisance in my view. And if it interferes with a person's enjoyment of the environment, having regard to the duration of time, the timing itself and the opening hours, then we must be careful of this. Thank you.
Councillor Dutta. Alderman Brackus, you've.
I know I already spoke, but I've just been informed by the director that I may have, in not expecting to be introducing the items this afternoon, missed something. There was supposed to be an advice clause as part of this that was included in the information provided us to the hub, so I can read that out and ask that somebody either. Or do we either?
Yeah,
do we?
okay. If you read that out, and we'll get a mover and a seconder.
So what we've got here is noted that the acceptable solution for operating hours is 8 to 6 p.m. Yada yada yada. The advice clause is that the use of the gym on Sundays beyond 12 occasions per annum be subject to advising the residents and council in writing prior to each occasion. Purpose to manage and monitor the potential for impacts on nearby residential amenity. So that should be added into the motion.
Well, that'll need to be moved and seconded, Lord Mayor.
Yep. If someone could move that, Councillor Ewan, seconded by Councillor Sherlock. Okay, I might just see if there's anyone else wants to comment on the substantive motion before we move to that clause. Any other discussion? Councillor Coates.
Look, just very quickly, briefly, for the benefit, I guess, of members that weren't on the planning subcommittee, and I have every sympathy for residents and members of the North Hobart community, because I agree, and I supported the referral to infrastructure committee, but parking and amenity is quite frankly a mess, and we have a part to play in that solution, if you like. But I suspect, and some of the people giving representations, fairly or otherwise, I guess I would say fairly, apportion a lot of the blame to Hobart Council. But just speaking for this application, and look, I'm loath to always knock something back, which I think honestly will get up on appeal. But just to speak to the items that were mentioned before by Councillor Dutta. So look, when it comes to parking, obviously if you're reading through the report, and he quoted section E661P1, where it must meet sufficient to meet users, and they talked about the requirement is 96, and then what they have provided and what council has provided on the roads. Look, ultimately, it's very hard to argue against this development application, considering they're not actually increasing the capacity of a school in any way. And so I guess you can quibble as to whether the parking that's on the site already is sufficient or not, but ultimately at appeal, I believe that they would win the case, so it'll be a strikeout for the ratepayers of Hobart. In regards to site distance, we've obviously got our planning committee report saying that there's no concerns with that. So in the absence of further expert evidence, I would suggest that again, we would lose on appeal. And in regards to the hours of operation, look, as Alderman Baracus has just mentioned, this was discussed, raised by respondents and also discussed at the committee, and that advice clause was given. But it was noted by the director, I believe, that what they're proposing to operate within is the allowable hours of operation. And of course, a school is a perfectly allowable function to exist and business, and ultimately they are allowed to do the activity to which they want to build this building to do. But I guess to give a bit more comfort to members, ultimately they're not looking to increase the size of the school to have more interactions. They're just looking to upgrade the quality of their facilities, and I think they should have every right to do so. So I would urge you to support the application.
Okay, Alderman Zuko.
Yeah, Lord Mayor, I just need some clarification on process. What are we discussing, the amendment? Are we discussing the substantive motion or the motion?
At the moment,
Because
we're discussing the motion.
Not the amendment.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I might just make some comments on the proposal generally rather than the amendment. Look, I think a few people have made a few sort of pointed comments about parking in North Hobart. I mean, one of the challenges with parking is when the planning authority doesn't ensure that there's adequate parking in facilities when there is expansions of them. And I think this possibly could be one of them based on the information that I've listened to tonight. There's a very well-known facility down in North Hobart that I think expanded its seats of operation over a number of years, and it's still only got 30 car parks, whereas if it had been following the planning scheme, it'd have about 300. So every time we approve a development and we don't consider the need for a private operator to provide adequate facilities for their development, we end up having a detrimental impact on the public. And that means that the public are expected to fix up problems that should be probably fixed by private operations. And I think on balance, this one does raise some concerns. I am also persuaded by the residents who feel that they haven't had adequate consultation with the school, which is disappointing because I think the school could certainly have done perhaps a better job with that, with involving the residents as their neighbours and making sure that they had more of a say in this process. And I think it's important also to recognise that there is another step prior to a full hearing of the tribunal, which obviously costs money, and that is a mediation process. And perhaps some of these issues could be sorted out through the mediation process if council does choose to not accept the design as it stands without sufficient parking. Okay, so we might move on now to the Sunday clause, the advice, and if anyone's got any comments.
Lord Mayor, I've got my hand up. I want to ask some questions, please.
Sure, Alderman Zuko.
Yes, because I only just put a clarification before. This is a question through you to the General Manager in regards to parking. Did many years ago the Hobart City Council have a parking fund where all parking fines and parking revenue was put into that fund and not into consolidated revenue?
Yes, Lord Mayor, we did through you. That parking, that was a requirement in the Local Government Highways Act that was repealed in the year 2000. So now the parking, there's no requirement to have a parking fund.
If that was a requirement under the Act, but if the Hobart City Council had a parking fund, it could generate all monies and revenues from a parking fund to replenish car parking in the city rather than subsidise a rate base. Is that correct, General Manager?
Well, that's one argument through you, Lord Mayor. the fact remains that we do not have a parking fund as we sit here at the moment.
Maybe the Hobart City Council should give consideration to that. Thank you.
Okay, is there any further comments on the matter before us, particularly the, I'm now moving on to the amendment, which is the Sunday operation advice. Okay, there's no hands up, so I'm going to put the Sunday operation advice clause. I'll go around and see if you're in favour of that. Or actually, I'm going to test the floor. Is there anyone opposed to that additional Sunday operation advice clause? There is no raised hand, so I will declare that amendment has been carried unanimously. And now just on the substantive item, Alderman Barakis, did you want to sum up at all?
Just briefly, and I'll touch on the point that Alderman Briscoe made, which I did forget to bring up at the opening, was whilst this application I think was generally accepted by the committee, did meet the criteria of the planning scheme and should be approved. I think there are obviously some broader considerations as to the impacts in that area from an infrastructure perspective, from a parking perspective, just on that street and more broadly. So it has been referred to the infrastructure committee, and hopefully we do get some sort of, I suppose, plan or some understanding on how the council can fulfil its role in helping maintain and expand the infrastructure of our city as our city is continuing to grow, as we're seeing in this application. Beyond that, though, I'll commend the item and and encourage everyone to approve it.
Okay, I'll just go around and see how you would like to vote. Alderman Zuko.
All Lord.
Alderman Briscoe.
For, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Sexton.
For, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Thomas.
For, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Barakis.
For, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Dutta.
Against.
Councillor Ewan.
For.
Councillor Sherlock.
For.
Councillor Coates.
For, Lord Mayor.
And I'll vote against.
So, Lord Mayor, that's carried 9 votes to 1. Sorry, 8 votes to 2. Sorry.
Okay, now we're moving on to item 9.2. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Item 9.2, it's 6 to 8 DeWitt Street Battery Point, or 6 to 8 DeWitt Street Battery Point. It's a bit of a weird one. The applicants had a approval for short stay accommodation that wasn't acted upon, and it was set to expire, and they've sought to have that permit extended so they can commence that work and get that done, so to speak. There was some discussion about this during the committee meeting, and I think the committee did, as a majority, agree that on the in the interest of fairness, given that this was approved by the council, they should get another chance to continue this on and get it done. So other than that, I'm not sure what else there is to say about it, other than I'll commend it.
Alderman Thomas, oh, you're seconding it, are you? Okay. Alderman Sexton. Alderman Sexton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a question. It's been extended for 4 years. Is that correct through you to Mr. Noy?
Yeah, through you, Lord Mayor, that's correct. That's what they're seeking for.
And I mean, maybe things have changed and I've been here too long, but we used to approve 2+2. We gave people 2 years and then approved an additional 2. I'm not sure why we are approving an additional 4 years when they only had 2 years to start.
Yes, through you, Lord Mayor, they certainly can apply for 4 years, but it's a maximum or up to a total of 6 years. So it would be, they've already had 2 and they're seeking a further 4.
Okay, so on that basis, it's unlikely that, I mean, if we refused it, they've got a right to 6 years, so that would be futile. So thank you.
Well, Lord Mayor, the council is entitled to refuse it, and there wouldn't be any appeal rights.
Actually, I've got a question related to that, if I can, Mr. Noy. So as I understand it, the state planning rules do outlaw self-contained visitor accommodation in Battery Point. So it only allows for visitor accommodation if there is an on-site manager or a traditional B&B with a manager or somebody managing the site, and that was put in place with the council's very strong support a couple of years ago. So I'm just wondering how has this particular development got a plan for an on-site manager?
Through you, Lord Mayor. No, there's no intention to have an on-site manager in this instance. It's a fairly small dwelling, 1 bedroom dwelling, so no scope for on-site manager.
So then how are we just able to overrule the statewide planning provisions? Wouldn't we lose that under appeal?
There's no, well, if we were to approve it, there's no necessarily appeal rights that exist for third parties in this instance.
Yeah, okay. Can you just, sorry, last question. Can you just clarify though, given what the statewide laws say about self-contained visitor accommodation in Battery Point, how have we actually got discretion? I thought that was quite a clear ruling that we could not approve self-contained visitor accommodation in Battery Point.
Well, that has been the long-standing position of council. However, the council can extend a valid permit for a period of time up to 6 years total. Now, this is the application before us. The officers have pointed out to council and have recommended not to grant that extension, but it's within the power of council to grant it in this circumstances, notwithstanding the change in the policy position adopted by the state government and clearly supported at the time by council.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think we need to emphasise that the council did approve this 2 years ago. I don't know whether you were at the planning meeting, Lord Mayor, but if you were, the applicants did speak to us. And it turns out that a family member required this accommodation and therefore they didn't start their visitor accommodation. I think as a matter of equity, whilst they've got the approval, they've had approval under old rules and the planning directive changed the rules. I think as a matter of equity, we've got to allow them to have an extra few years. As soon as the COVID stuff is over, then presumably the visitor accommodation market will improve. So as a matter of equity, I don't think we should put these applicants at a disadvantage when they have got they had a valid permit and they're seeking under an extension so that it allows them to have visitor accommodation when the visitor accommodation market returns. I don't think we should put these genuine, for good reasons, they did not offer it to short-term accommodation. If you were at the meeting, Lord Mayor, you would realise it was good reasons. It's not a, they didn't require any changes to the physical outlay of the rooms. So it's my understanding over the number of years that in these cases, we go for equity for the applicant. And the next thing is an administrative decision having no rights of appeal seems to be quite an anathema to me. I think if we make an administrative decision with no right of appeal, I think that's against democracy. And I know Lord Mayor and a couple of others are against the state major projects legislation, which is going through Parliament at the moment, because it's got no appeal rights. This has got no appeal rights if we reject it. I think the equity argument, the good faith argument, and now the having no right of appeal for rejection, I think we've got to give this extension. Thank you.
Councillor Coates.
Oh, look, thank you, Lord Mayor. Not to, I don't want to belabor a point, but look, I think as a general principle, where we can, we should always encourage people to do the right thing. In this instance, we heard from the applicants, and look, don't quote me on this, but I think the committee might have even voted 6 or even 5, or maybe it was 5 in favour at the planning committee, where ultimately they did the right thing. They said, look, we purchased this property with the intention, which was perfectly fine at the time and allowable. They did the right thing. They sought the permit. As it then happens, they rented it out to a family member. And then again, they've done the right thing and said, well, you know, we still rented it out, acted as an accommodation business, if you like, but it was to a family member. And so now they've sought what they're allowed to, which is an extension to the existing permit that was given to them. So, you know, in this instance, frankly, they could have not told us that they were renting it out to a family member rather than renting it out, you know, week by week, and we would have been none the wiser because they had a permit to obviously rent it out short-term accommodation. So I think in this instance, they've done the right thing when they purchased the property originally, and when they sought a permit originally, it was all allowed. It was all within the rules. They weren't seeking to go outside the square. And as I said, when this came up planning committee, I think from memory, it got majority support. And yeah, looking with that in mind, I would urge my fellow members to approve it.
Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I just wanted to thank you, Lord Mayor, for your questions, because that helped sort of clarify things for me in my mind, because I was of the understanding that short stay accommodation wasn't allowed in Battery Point. I will be voting against this application. I think for obvious reasons. We all know that short stay accommodation is having a huge impact on the local rental market, and I don't believe this is putting the owners at any sort of a disadvantage when, you know, it's such a highly sought after area, and I'm sure they could find some long-term tenants quite easily for it. So I will be voting against it, and I would urge everybody who's concerned about the housing crisis to also vote against this application.
Alderman Thomas.
Yes, thanks, Lord Mayor. Look, I think it's really quite simple, just listening to the various comments being made. We actually made our decision on the substantive application when it first came to council. And in all commercial contracts or agreements, it's not dissimilar in terms of what we should do. And I think Alderman Briscoe mentioned equity. I mean, it's a realistic, what we're looking at here, or should be looking at here, and I assume we're not, some people won't, is the circumstances or the reasonableness not of what they intend to do, but of the application. In other words, what is the reasonable, what are the facts? Is it reasonable for them to apply for an extension to an existing permit? Now, it is not a case of adjudicating on the permit. Whether or not the state changed the legislation, whether or not we've changed our policy, the applicant has the right. Forget what we're talking about, housing and other issues. We're looking at an application to extend an existing approval, nothing more, nothing less. If the application is on reasonable grounds, then that, ladies and gentlemen, what we should be adjudicating, not the original application. We are already finished, exercised our function some 2 years ago. So that's the legal issue. I know you don't necessarily have to take the legal issue, but that's what we're judged by, and that's what we should be doing tonight.
Alderman Brakis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm not seeking to sum up. I just had a question. I just want to clarify something. Just to confirm, because I think there's a bit of back and forth over this. We're not making a planning determination tonight. We're not determining a planning application. We're just determining whether or not to extend a previously approved application. That's correct?
Mr. Noy?
Yes, Lord Mayor, that's correct. You're considering the basis for an extension to the existing permit.
So as to the rules in Battery Point, currently, this was approved at the time, and it was approved under the rules that existed at the time. So we just all we're looking at is to extend that existing application.
That's correct, Lord Mayor.
Thank you for that.
Alderman Zuko?
My first question is to Mr. Noy. Mr. Noy, through you, Lord Mayor, was this recommended by council officers for approval in 2018?
That's correct, Lord Mayor.
Right. So it was recommended for approval in 2018 as visitor accommodation. All the people are doing is seeking an extension of time. I think it'd be absolutely unreasonable if this council did not allow these persons to have an extension of time, and unfair as well. You know, I understand we may or may not have a housing crisis. I think we do have a housing crisis, but to be unfair on these people because of that is not the way to go. The other aspect of it and the unfairness of it is there's no rights of appeal. I believe that each and every one of us like the way the planning scheme is because it gives an opportunity for all parties to appeal. What we are doing here is not giving an ample opportunity for these persons to proceed with an extension of time, but then what we're doing is we're cutting them off at the knees because there's no rights of appeal. That is absolutely absurd and unfair in all matters that we give consideration to. Now, look, if the people had have proceeded with it all and we didn't have COVID and whatever else has been happening, these people would have been up and running. Now, look, I believe this is just being reasonable. I cannot in any way, shape or form believe that we as elected members are going to be unreasonable to these people, and in particular unfair if they have no rights of appeal. I'm sorry, I just find this absolutely absurd if we vote against this.
Further discussion? Councillor Dutta?
Lord Mayor, through you, I just need a clarification. Firstly, it is my understanding that when this was discussed at the planning committee meeting, the voting was 3-4 and 2 against, and not 5 or 6, as I heard earlier on. Can I get that clarified, please?
Mr. Noy or General Manager?
Sorry, Lord Mayor, I don't have the voting record in front of me.
Nor do I, Lord Mayor. So maybe we could take that question on notice and return to that, Lord Mayor.
Sure. Councillor Dutta?
Yes, and the second question I have is, it is my understanding that the staff have recommended refusal. And if they have recommended refusal, is it on good grounds or is it on bad grounds?
Mr. Noy?
Lord Mayor, it's on the grounds of the policy position that council has had in its previous planning scheme that covered this area, and its long-standing position around visitor accommodation, self-contained visitor accommodation in Battery Point, and based on the grounds of the current policy position endorsed by state government.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I voted against this in the planning committee. The points to remember for me is this, that when we want to support the council recommendation, when we support it because it's what we want, we speak quite strongly for it. But when we don't want to, when the recommendation is against, we then argue differently. I am simply saying here to everybody, and this is my view, I made a decision against it. From my own experience, there was a time when natural justice was denied to some of us. And because of that reason, I will change my vote and give that a fair chance. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, maybe just going back to Councillor Dutta's first question, the minutes show that the vote was 3-2 at the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherlock.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I just wanted to ask just a question just with regards to what was stated before about this issue not having any appeal rights. I was just wondering, is that as a per regulation per the planning scheme? If the director could clarify that, please.
Look, it's under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, 1993. It's not had a power provided under the scheme itself, but under the Act.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. So I just wanted to make certain that it wasn't something that was conjured up as absurd and unfair that was pulled out of the hat by councillors or elected members, but it was actually something that was set within the Act. So thank you very much for clarifying that.
Okay, can I actually ask a question of Mr. Noy too before I speak? There's some very strong suggestions being put out here, Mr. Noy, that the staff's recommendation to not approve this extension is potentially sort of inequitable and unfair. I mean, was this something that you considered or the staff considered, and why have you recommended that we not approve this if it's inequitable and unfair?
Well, through you, Lord Mayor, look, I do appreciate the I suppose the unique circumstances of the applicant. However, Council has had long-standing policy position in relation to this matter. The basis of the original approval was only the capacity to approve it was only, I suppose facilitated or brought about was by a unilateral decision of the state government to introduce a policy position contrary to Council's strongly held position. That policy position ultimately changed after lobbying from both Council and I think numerous residents within Battery Point, and Battery Point was singled out as the I think one of the only suburbs or only few suburbs that were precluded from allowing standalone self-contained visitor accommodations because of the concerns that were ultimately found to be, correct. So it's that position that the officers felt that needed to be upheld, notwithstanding, and I understand the unique circumstances. But as I said, it's open to Council to take those unique circumstances into account and ultimately approve the extension if they so wish.
Okay, thank you. Well, I might just have a say here before Alderman Brucker sums up. Yeah, I think it is tricky, I understand, but I'd like to, there's been a lot of talk about that we need to follow the facts or observe the facts and act in a legal manner. I mean, the legal situation is such that we are following what is in the law, with what is the policy of both the council and the state government under our planning scheme. As the director has pointed out, the staff recommended refusal, and this particular approval managed to sort of squeeze in a small window between the original Battery Point planning scheme and the state government's new laws around visitor accommodation. So I think that is the actual fact of the law. And it's important that we are consistent with our policies. And this is a really important policy and always has been for Battery Point, because otherwise, we know there's already a lot of visitor accommodation there and a lot of people exploiting loopholes. This is a really important policy principle for that neighbourhood. The second fact is that there is no loss of equity here. We are not taking away the property owners' right to stop them leasing this out on the long-term rental market. So that's certainly something that is available to the owners, and I would encourage them to do so. The third fact is that in the years since 2018, the world has changed. And it is it's a very unfair world for renters looking for long-term rental properties in many of our suburbs of Hobart, including Battery Point, Sandy Bay, West Hobart, South Hobart. The UTAS estimates that there's about 800 long-term rental properties that have been lost to visitor accommodation in a matter of years. Now, that is devastating. 800 properties lost from our long-term rental market and transitioned into visitor accommodation. And we have to actually do something about this at some point. These kind of issues, as they come up, do need to be dealt with. So I will be not supporting the Planning Committee's recommendation. I'll be doing that on the basis of fact and of law, and on the basis of the recommendation of our professional city planning staff. Thank you. Alderman Brooks, did you want to sum up?
Yes, thanks, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, it's true that there is there is a conversation that has to be had about short stay accommodation. It is true that the rules have changed since this application has come through, but it is also true that what we have before us isn't a planning application for short stay accommodation. It's the extension of a previously approved application, that was approved, and the applicants now are just seeking to extend that. The idea, as was said by numerous aldermen and councillors, that there is no right to appeal this decision, I think places the applicants in a pretty terrible situation should the council opt to refuse this. And look, in regards to the advice by the planning staff, the planning staff have done exactly what their job is to provide us the letter of the law and the expert advice, and then it falls to us to use our discretions and to apply our discretions as democratically elected representatives. And part of that is assessing, what we have under the planning scheme, or what we have under the current law, against common sense and against fairness and against principles of equity. These applicants, as Councillor Coates said, have done everything the right way. They're applying for applying for an extension, and if they were to have this extension refused, they would have no method of trying to appeal that or trying to do anything about that. In the interest of fairness, this is something that should be approved. And that doesn't mean that anyone who approves this on the interest of fairness disagrees about about issues regarding short stay accommodation or about housing. It's a matter of this case, and as the director said, it does have unique considerations given the situation. In the interest of fairness, these applicants deserve the ability to extend this so they can do what they had previously approved to do. So look, I'd be commending this. I'd be encouraging everybody to be supporting this, and I hope that this does get approved, and I hope that this does go through, because it'd be a sad state if these property owners and these applicants had this taken away from them.
Okay, thank you. I'll go around and see how you'd like to vote. Alderman Zuko.
For.
Alderman Briscoe.
For, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Sexton.
For.
Alderman Thomas.
For.
Alderman Barakis.
For, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Dutta.
For.
Councillor Ewan.
Against.
Councillor Sherlock,
Against.
Councillor Coates,
For, Lord Mayor.
and I will vote against.
So, Lord Mayor, that's carried 7 votes to 3.
Okay, thank you. We're moving now on to item 9.3, and I'll pass over to Alderman Brackus to introduce this item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm introducing item 9.3, which is 284A Argyle Street, North Hobart, for partial demolition, alteration, signage, and change of use to resource processing, food services, and general hire. I'll move that.
Need a seconder? Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you. Effectively, this is for a sort of small scale boutique whiskey distillery and tasting room. This was discussed. I think it was probably one of the more discussed items of the night. There was some consideration as to, or there was some concern as to the issue of black mold, but I think based off the feedback from the applicants as to their requirements and what they've done under the Environmental Protection Act, as well as the advice from the planning staff, I think it was the majority of the committee did think that that was something that had been appropriately considered and appropriately catered for. I think beyond that, there were some considerations as to the impact on the residential area, but given the operating hours, given how this is going to function, and the fact that it's not a industrial scale distillery, it's more of a boutique thing, and I think effectively it's almost more of a showcase to show how these things, how the process works, how they're making the whiskey as opposed to making it in huge quantities, which is something that would probably be more viable or more practical on a larger scale set up elsewhere outside of the city centre. So look, ultimately, I think this would potentially be a great addition to the North Hobart area. It's another way for the applicants, but for Hobart and Tasmania to help showcase that sort of boutique, locally made product that we're becoming known for. And I think that they've done what they need to do to satisfy the planning scheme. And so, look, this is something that I'm eagerly supporting, and I hope that the rest of the council supports it as well.
Sorry, did I get a seconder? Councillor Ewan.
Actually, I think Jeff seconded that.
Sorry, Alderman Briscoe seconded it. Yes, sorry. Councillor Ewan, you wanted to speak to it?
Yes, please. I really do want to support this. But in the last few days, I've been contacted, as I'm sure we all have, by some residents in the area about the black mold issue, and only about maybe half an hour before our meeting, we were sent some information by the applicants about it, sort of refuting that. For myself, I don't really know who to believe about this. I think it is a great idea, as long as it's not going to actually cause any damage to the neighbouring properties. And I personally don't really feel like I have enough information to support this tonight. So I'm just curious to know whether there is time to defer this so that we can get some more information on this, because I just personally don't feel right about it at the moment, unless somebody has some more information about the mold issue that would satisfy this.
Mr. Noy, is there a time if there was deferral?
Lord Mayor, through you, no, unless there was an extension of time provided by the applicant, then the matter expires tonight, and we would be forced to make a decision tonight if we didn't have an extension of time.
Okay, thank you. Is there any clarity that you're able to give from a staff perspective on the mold issue? Because there were quite a few people who were really concerned about that.
Yeah, assuming, Lord Mayor, you'd like me to answer that question?
Yes, please, Mr. Noy.
Yeah, our environmental health officers have done their own research in relation to this matter. Firstly, this is a closed loop distillery. So the escape of particulates or vapours from the process is not not possible. Unlike some other distillery operations, it is a small scale operation. The examples of this whiskey mould in other locations are primarily associated with large-scale industrial type operations, and particularly with storage facilities where there can be evaporation from timber barrels. This is not that scale operation. It is a small scale operation, closed loop distillery. It is not a storage facility. We have examples and experience of these operations elsewhere within Hobart. There was one in Battery Point, and we've got also one in West Hobart, where we don't have any experience of this type of mould occurring. And we're satisfied that there are, I suppose, scope, if that was the case, to impose further restrictions under the Environmental Management and Pollution Control Act. But it's not our experience, and it's not the research that we've undertaken to date to suggest that this system would create that problem.
Thanks very much for that. I guess from my perspective, I'd be pretty satisfied with that. I guess it's just a little bit disappointing maybe that the applicant hasn't possibly contacted the neighbouring residents. So that might have been a good idea in hindsight, but I'm quite happy to support this.
Okay, Mr. Noiwell, you've got the floor. Can I just ask a couple of questions on the sort of environmental management of it? Has this sort of triggered anything under the Environmental Protection Act? This particular, is there any regulation of this kind of facility under the Environmental Protection Act, or is this fall underneath a particular level?
Well, look, it's a level 1 activity. So it is recognised as an activity that's regulated under MCA, but it's not a activity that is regulated by state government, the EPA, for example, because it's a small scale operation. It doesn't trigger the level 2 provisions under MCA. Given the evidence that we have before us, we are satisfied that this does not represent a risk, environmental risk to the community. We are satisfied that there, notwithstanding that, there are legislative provisions available to us if we were found to be incorrect and if there was an environmental impact that necessitated further controls being placed on this proposal. But based on the evidence that we have before us, we're satisfied that the operation will not create an environmental nuisance that warrants any additional controls at this point in time, beyond what we've included as conditions of approval.
Okay, sorry, just another one, Mr. Noy. I understand that at the moment it's level 1 because it's operating 2 days per week and 30,000 litres. Is that the trigger?
Lord Mayor, the trigger is the amount of water used within the operation on a daily basis. And yeah, and it's below that trigger point.
But I also understand that in the documents provided by the proponent, they do talk about an annual production volume of cask strength is projected to be 100,000 litres of spirit PA and 350 days of production per annum at year 5. So how does, that will sort of take it into that industrial scale, won't it?
Well, if they exceed the scale of operation that would put it within the level 2 criteria, then that would definitely trigger a new application that would require the assessment by the EPA and and as a new application. Like any proposal, if they increase the intensity of the operation to a certain level, then that will trigger a new planning application.
Okay, so even though they're telling us in their documents that in attachment B, page 166, that this is the production levels they're planning to get to in 5 years, it just seems like we're tying this up in red tape to a certain extent if we're approving it at the basis of a smaller amount, but actually the quite clear intention of the proponent is to extend it to, like, scale it up every year to be producing almost every day in quite large amounts.
Yeah. Through you, Lord Mayor, if I just may refer to my notes, the application before us is, as I understand it, if I can refer to the application. Sorry, the trigger point for a distillery is consuming 100 kilolitres or more of water in a working day of 8 hours. That triggers it into a level 2 activity. The application before us stipulates that they will not be exceeding that that capacity. Now, what you've quoted talks about a yearly production level. The level 2 activity provisions talk about water usage or capacity on a daily basis. The evidence that the submission that has been made by the applicant does not trigger that that level 2, or is not at that scale.
Okay. All right, I'll see if there's other comments on this or questions on this item. It is all quite, for a brand new sort of industry that's got some quite particular features, and going into a residential area with quite sensitive heritage homes, it's quite a lot for us to sort of quickly make decisions on. So anyway, Alderman Thomas.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Look, just a clarification through you to the General Manager or to Mr. Noy. This does appear, whilst it obviously is an issue that has been of great concern to a number of residents, it seems to me more that it's an issue of, that goes to a condition of approval as opposed to an approval of an activity under the planning scheme. We're here to discuss tonight approving an activity under the planning scheme, which is a distillery operation, whereas what we're talking about, or we appear to have been talking about, is an issue of operation, which will be subject to conditions of approval at a later point. This just seems to me and I did query the planning director earlier today, and he had confirmed to me, and he can again, that this is not a matter for the planning scheme that we're dealing with right now. Mr. Noy.
Yeah, that's correct. The application before us requires no more than 40,000 litres of water per day, and that is well under what's stipulated as a level 2 activity. So that's the application before us. If they deviate from that or increase that, then that would introduce the scope for a new application. So before us at the moment is, you're correct, is the application as stipulated within the documentation submitted to us. I think you're on mute, Lord Mayor.
Oh, sorry, Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Not seeking to sum up, just another couple of questions. Director, just following on from some of the questions that have been asked, if this, I suppose if there was, I'll say, well, do we say non-compliance or do we say an event where there is an issue around the black mold? I imagine even if it is a level 1, it's deemed to be a level 1 use under the environmental protection, there would still be clauses and whatnot in legislation that would provide some protection to affected residents.
Mr. Noy?
Yes, MCA does provide scope for us to issue an environmental protection notice on level 1 activities, and we've done that in operations or uses within the city before, where there has been a need to do so, given the particulars of those operations. If there was an issue evident with this operation, then we could certainly investigate it and pose a notice on those on the business to upgrade their operation to limit that pollution if that was occurring.
Thank you. And just for the sake of completeness and clarity, I guess, the application that we have now falls well under the threshold to be deemed as a level 2. Should it become deemed as a level 2, does that just bring it into new regulations under the Environmental Protection Act, or does that, or MCA, or would that require it coming back to council for another planning application?
Through you, Lord Mayor, would require both. It would require it to come back before council as a new planning application, but only after the matter was considered by the EPA.
Yep. So we would effectively need them to approve before we can really make a consideration.
The process is that the EPA would determine the application in the first instance and then advise us, and after which time we would then proceed to notification and then determination by council.
Excellent. And just lastly, and apologies for all the questions.
You're right.
The current application falls well under part 1, well under sort of level 1, sorry. And if so we can only, we can have this speculation, or we have information that might lead us to believe that this might in the future become a level 2 or whatever use. But as we've seen in other situations, such as the share houses in Sandy Bay or whatever have you, we're required to only assess this based on what's being applied for, not what we think might happen in the future. And if something was going to happen in the future, we would then have to make another determination then. Is that correct?
Yeah, through you, Lord Mayor, that is correct. And I just reiterate, this is a small scale operation. It's not a big floor plate that we're talking about here. It's unlikely to have the capacity to reach those sorts of levels. And you're correct. This is what's been applied for. They're not applying for a level 2 activity. They're applying for a level 1 activity, and we're assessing that application before us.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Mr. Noy, can I just, seeing we're talking about level 1 activities, I know others have got their hands up, but so this is going to use 40,000 litres per day, is that correct? That's what they're applying for?
That's correct, and their information stipulates the majority of which is used for cooling of the condensing jackets on the steels.
Okay. So when is the trigger point for the level 2?
100 kilolitres per day in an 8-hour day.
That's the level 2 point?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. All right. I can see that, sorry, Alderman Briscoe's got his hand up.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a question to the Director. The Lord Mayor mentioned that this was in the middle of a residential area. Can you just confirm the planning designation for this site?
Yes, Lord. Yes, through you, Lord Mayor, it's light industrial zone.
Yes, and can you confirm that the residential area is on the other side of the road? The road, by the way, that has 6,000 cars go past it every day.
Through you, Lord Mayor, there is zoning across the road, residential zoning across the road, and also I understand to the rear.
So, but legitimate, it is light commercial, light industrial site. Yep.
That's correct.
Yeah. Look, we listened to the representatives, and they have genuine fears about the black fungus. But I think reassurances by your report and other information, I think, whilst if it comes to be an issue in the future, then obviously council will act. The other issues the residents on the other side of the road raised was one residence, which is directly opposite the site, has a bedroom in the front of her house or their house, and they're worried about noise as well. It's very hard to be worrying about noise, in my view, when you've got a very, very busy feeder road that's right in front of you. The other issue was parking, and I think the planning report has indicated that it's not going to generate too much extra issues to do with parking. As we know, North Hobart has a parking issue anyway. So we have to listen to the concerns that have been raised, but we have to use our judgment. And our judgment here is obviously informed by your report and this discussion tonight. So I will be supporting this, this application. But if at any stage the representatives do have any issues arise, then I'm happy to bring it before council. And I do note, unlike the previous item, the representatives have a right of appeal as well. So we're not denying the representatives another say. Thank you.
Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Yeah, look, similar to Councillor Ewan, I also initially had a few issues with this, and I know that most of us probably also received various pieces of information with regards to the mould issue, and that was a sincere concern for me as well. But I would probably just like to just address 6 issues that I think have alleviated that concern for me. Firstly, the research conducted that the director mentioned about similar places in West Hobart and Battery Point. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that this is a small scale and has a closed loop system. Point number 3, that it doesn't actually trigger the EPA because of the nature of the scale of this particular development. And number 4, that a new application would actually come to us if it actually got to that industrial level, or that, i.e. level 2. But as has been pointed out, it was only going to be 40,000 litres per day, and the level 2 is actually invoked by 100 kilolitres in a working day of 8 hours. And point number 5, I think I did read in the application that it seemed as though along that progressive continuum of 5 years, the consumption would actually increase. But I think, as has been pointed out, that's not a daily consumption. It was actually noted as a yearly consumption, but the daily consumption would be that 40,000 litres per day. And I think finally, point number 6 is that this is a light industrial zone. And while I have deep concerns, and I fully appreciate where the residents are coming from, once again, I also would like to just let them know that if in the future anything does prevail in terms of mould, or they have any further issues, please do come to us as elected members. But unfortunately, based on those 6 points, I think I'll be supporting this today.
Okay, Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a few questions. Question number 1, I am aware of the fact that in the city planning meeting on the 14th, in the report, page 57, attachment A, and I read, there will be appropriate management of activity and noise so as to limit impacts on nearby properties. My question is is there a management plan submitted by the applicant apart from the noise assessment report?
Mr. Noy? Mr. Noy? Oh,
Sorry, mute. No, there isn't, Lord Mayor. There is, however, a condition proposed to be included within the approval that restricts impact of noise on adjacent residential properties.
Thank you. And the second question, Lord Mayor, that I have is this. It appears that the focus thus far has been on the distillery, but I understand, and I seek clarification here, that distillery is only one part of it. The other two is the bar and the food. Is that correct? And that the distillery will only open from 7 to 7, but the other will open from 12 to 10:30.
Mr. Noy?
Yes, Lord Mayor, that is correct.
Thank you very much. Now, I want to move away from the other issue that we've been talking about, and the focus was in the distillery. There are a number of issues here, but I want to just, because of times, focus on two issues. Issue number one is parking. We've come to that again, that beast, and it's going to create problems in North Hobart because we know how difficult it is as far as parking is concerned. Under acceptable solution, clause 6611A, the spaces required is 32, and the provision made by the applicant is only 2. Now, when you take that into consideration and now consider that it failed under acceptable solution under performance criteria 661P1 states the number of on-site car parking spaces must be sufficient to meet the reasonable needs of users, having regard to all of the following. Now, A states that car parking demand generated by the proposed use during its proposed hours of operation, if we take into consideration about 90 patrons, it will create quite a huge demand on parking. The study that was done during the COVID period from the 23rd to the 27th of May, the evidence of that particular survey to me is not really representative. It is inaccurate. And furthermore, the study that was used of 2016 to support this, some of the other, as was stated by the report and the council engineer, that unfortunately we cannot really rely on these facts. Now, considering that, the component, the element D of clause 661 of the performance criteria states the availability, likely use of other modes of transport. Again, there has been a study done, and that study stated in 2020 that 56% of the people arrive in their own cars, 28% walk, only 6% use bicycles, and 4% of people walk. Now, we're going to compound and exacerbate the problem again for parking in North Hobart, and hence we need to be aware of this. For me, this is a planning issue. The second issue is the hours of operation and the noise impact on the residents. Now, the distillery is okay. I have no problem with that. It's from 7 to 7. But it's the hours of opening of the other two components that goes on to 10:30. And some of us who have been in business in this hospitality area, when we close at 10:30, it doesn't stop then. It takes many more minutes and sometimes hours to complete the work. So my concern here is that clause 24.3.1P1 states hours of operation must not have an unreasonable impact through noise or other emissions that are unreasonable in their timing, their duration, and extent. It is my considered opinion that the timing is unreasonable, that the duration from Monday to Sunday, 7 days a week, which will have an impact on the opposite residents, is unreasonable, and the extent, remember that they'll be able to go outside at the outdoor, and during summertime, it will create problem. So for me, the noise impact on residents can cause sleep disturbance, because there is evidence to show that there are some people who are light sleepers, and the older you are, the more elderly you are, there are differences with regards to sleeping. So noise is going to have an impact. The opening hours will impact, and therefore my considered opinion of this, that in my discussion, I have difficulty supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Zuko.
Yes, Lord Mayor. Look, I'm fully aware of the Environmental Protection Act, and I've discussed this over the years many times with the director. Notwithstanding that, we need to at least provide some reassurance to those that have concerns in respect of noise and in respect of any release of the black fungus. If we put a condition in respect of that, at least it provides a little bit of assurance to those who have concerns that it's in the conditions, even though the environmental laws override it anyway. But it's nor here nor there. But I feel that we need to at least reassure those people that have those concerns that the environmental impact legislation covers them, and that by having a clause in the conditions just simply reinforces that. I have provided an amendment to Mr. Craig. If he's able to put that up, it'd be appreciated. If not, I'm happy to just read it out.
If it's fairly brief, Alderman Zuko, please.
Yes, it's very brief. I'll just read it out, Lord Mayor. Okay. That the use must not cause environmental harm by causing noise or allowing the release of airborne contaminants in the form of black fungus called whatever it is in the name. I'm not going to try and say those words. The reason for that it must not cause an environmental harm to the development, to the area. Lord Mayor, it's basically just to reinforce what we have under legislation, but it is put in as part of a condition, so the applicants are fully aware of the environmental legislation. So I move that as an amendment, Lord.
Okay, seconded by, is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Sherlock. Okay, did you want to speak to that any further, Alderman Zuko?
No, Lord Mayor. Look, as I said, it's very simple. It doesn't impact on the DA at all whatsoever, because the legislation overrides it. But it also, basically, it's providing the developer, notice that that's part of the Environmental Protection Act.
Okay, well, I'll put that amendment. Would anyone like to vote against that amendment? Or that extra condition? Okay, there's no hands up, so that's been approved unanimously. Is there any further discussion? No? Okay, I'll just say a few words. This has been a challenging one for me, just coming in at it, not attending the planning committee. It is
Point of order, Lord Mayor.
Yeah.
You spoke earlier, talked about surrounding residential areas, and
I think I asked some questions, Alderman Briscoe.
Okay, oh, well, I'm sorry if you do. I will check the tape, but it seemed to me that you were giving opinions as well.
No, I made one.
Okay, thank you. I'll withdraw my point of
So, yeah, I mean, it is a challenging one. It does feel a little bit difficult to support this when I'm not completely confident of all of the elements you know, I am very supportive of the idea, and the proponents have worked hard, and you know, I do feel for them, and I support their you know, support their enterprise and their vision. But I am in some ways uncomfortable with some of the information, and whether we are, this is quite a, you know, whether we're, this is going to be well enough regulated, or whether it is going to cause us problems in the future. I am pleased to hear the amendment, and that has persuaded me that we will have a sort of ongoing role in ensuring that there's no environmental nuisance and taking action, strong action, if it does occur. Although I do wonder if we're, you know, what could we actually do to, if there is a nuisance, to actually fix it. I'm also persuaded by the director did say to me that there is no storage involved in this DA. That there is nowhere on site where there's a substantial bond store where the actual wood caskets would be stored for a period of time, which they have to be for whiskey. And that is one of the major sources of this black mold. So if that is the case, and if there is any substantial storage on site, it would be in breach of the planning application, because Mr. Noy did say that it doesn't a bond store or a major storage facility. So that gives me some comfort, because I know that's the source of this particular problem. On the parking, again, I think this is, Councillor Dudda's right, this is a significant issue that we keep approving private developments without adequate on-site parking. And in some other cities, I'm aware that if there isn't a proposal to include parking in your private development for your customers, you are required to submit a travel plan, which explains, well, how are people going to get to your site? And unless we start doing that in some of these highly visited locations, it will end up falling to the public purse and the ratepayer to fix up and sort of cross-subsidise, in a sense, what should be being provided by private operators, and is required under the planning scheme. So there is some serious discussions there about trying to, you know, we can't keep just ignoring these requirements for parking without, unless there's some alternative through a travel plan, and the proponents show that they're encouraging travel to their site in other ways. And I think there is some work to be done there. But look, on balance, I think I'll probably will support it. I am very cautiously supporting this because I know the folks around the area are very concerned. But I think we will keep a very close eye on it. We will take action and issue environmental protection notices if there is a nuisance, and we will ensure that there isn't major storage on site as well. And hopefully that will address those concerns of the neighbours. Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Sorry, Alderman Barakis, did you want to sum up?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Lord Mayor, we've had a lot about, you know, what certain councillors or aldermen would like to see, and what we think might happen with this. But I think it is necessary to reiterate that we're only considering the application in front of us, and we're only talking about the rules that we're assessing it under as they currently exist. I think that's really important to emphasise. On the issue of the black mould, I think as the director made it pretty clear, and as the applicants have made it pretty clear, given the nature of the setup, the size of the setup, and then also the additional, restrictions that we've put on, conditions that we've put on, such as that suggested or put forward by Alderman Zuko. I think we are ultimately, well, we should all be happy that these issues have been taken into consideration, they've been mitigated, and I think that we do have the appropriate processes to take action if there is any non-compliance or there is any situation. And if we do find that they have exceeded what the level 1 is, there's already a process there to address that. And I don't think that's something that we should really be concerning ourselves with right now. To the parking issue, and look, I think I'm glad that Councillor Dutta has agreed and has said that there is a parking issue in North Hobart, because it's been something that I and a few others have been barreling on about for quite some time. But I do think it is really important and necessary to acknowledge. Look, on one hand, we're only assessing an application based on the planning scheme, whether or not we think this is a good application based on the planning scheme. However, the idea that we've got an issue with parking in North Hobart, effectively it's growing pains, or however you want to identify it, that the solution to that is to stop any more growth or any more activity or any additional activity from happening in the area, I think is counterproductive. I think our role in managing the city is to facilitate this growth as much as we are best able to. We want more businesses opening up in the city, especially now. If there's anybody who wants to be opening a new business right now, we should be doing what we can to encouraging and supporting that sort of thing, and providing the infrastructure necessary to facilitate that growth.
30 seconds.
And given that I've only got 30 seconds left, I'll make it really quick. It should be remembered that the council does make a killing out of its parking. So for us to make this investment to help grow the area and in making more publicly available parking, we would be making that money back in the long term. So I don't think it's necessarily us doing this out of the public purse or at the public cost. I think this is something that would benefit everybody if we were to take this more seriously than what we currently are. Beyond that, I'll commend the motion, and I'll hope that this does get approved, and I'll look forward to it coming to fruition.
Okay, I'll go around and see how you'd like to vote. Alderman Zuko?
Or
Alderman Zuko?
You're referring to me, Lord Mayor? Yep. Okay, I'm supportive.
Alderman Sexton?
Or
Alderman Thomas?
For.
Alderman Barakis?
Oh, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Dutta?
Against.
Councillor Ewan?
For.
Councillor Sherlock?
For.
Councillor Coates?
For, Lord Mayor.
And I'll vote for.
So, Lord Mayor, that's carried 9 votes to 1.
Okay, we are now moving on to item 10. Who'd like to introduce this?
I think that's me, Lord Mayor. I was waiting to be called, but I'm happy to jump in.
Yes, Alderman Barakis.
Thank you. Lord Mayor, item 10, 1 Hall Street Ridgeway, consent to construct building outside building envelope. I'll move the item.
Seconded by Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you. This one's I suppose just a bit of a, so I'll just read it out. In accordance with the schedule of easements to the sealed plan, as per the covenant, not to construct and maintain any building on lot 1 outside envelope A, that the council provide consent for the shed garage to be constructed outside envelope A, shown in attachment C to item 8.1 of the Open Planning Committee agenda of 14 September 2020. I'll just move that. I'm not sure if there's too much to say about this. I think this is just us providing consent.
Okay, any discussion? Alderman Briscoe?
No discussion. I'll put down my hand.
Okay, sure. All right, if there's no discussion, I'll see if anyone would like to vote against this proposal. If so, raise your hand. There's no objection, so that's passed unanimously. Item 11 is monthly building statistics. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll move that.
Seconded by Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, we've seen. Look, I suppose it's interesting to note that we've got 0 major projects in the period of the last month. I suppose that's obviously partially at least due to the economic circumstances we find ourselves in. I do think it's interesting to note down the bottom of this item that there is a bit of a reduction by, I suppose, just over $100 million from the 12 months up to August 2020 and the 12 months up to August 2019. I understand and appreciate that in some part this is based off the events of the last 6 months or so, but I think the ongoing statistics we've been provided have shown that there has been a downward trend in development applications, even in the 6 months before that. So we can't I suppose assume or state that this is all just due to COVID or the associated downturn. There is I think there has been a trend in a decrease in not so much applications, but the value of applications, at least, and those applications outside of just balconies and chimneys, I suppose, but actual substantive applications. And maybe that's something that we should be working on as a council. But other than that, I'll leave that there, and I'll leave these statistics for everyone to interpret as they see fit.
Okay, Alderman Briscoe. You'll need to unmute, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think Alderman Barakis was very kind and really understatement saying there was just a slight decrease. As you pointed out, 100 million is 100 million. It is concerning. I was on this council in the 1990s when we were in economic decline. It'd be interesting to see the next month's statistics, whether we continue this decline. But I can tell you, with the city declining, well, we need probably another month to see whether the decline is accelerating. But we need to work out ways we're going to stimulate our building and our major projects in the city. So I know people say, oh, well, it's good for, it's not good. It's not good if the building statistics look like this. It's not good for those people who work in these building sites. And I'm hoping that, I know Alderman Thomas has got a deep interest in this area, and hopefully he will come up with the committees on some ideas how we stimulate the economy, because we don't want to return to the 1990s. None of our good projects that we do could be funded if we return to the 1990s. It was gloom and doom, and we don't want to receive that. So I think Lord Mayor and other leadership roles in this council should be painting more positive view about business and encouraging business, encouraging development.
Alderman Thomas.
Yes, thanks, Lord Mayor. Look, I think I agree with the previous speakers. It's an issue, but I would like to raise a matter of caution here and say that there's a range of issues that will be causing and having an impact on these statistics. And it can be a whole range of things, including what's happening in the surrounding councils around Hobart. But look, realistically, you've got a range of issues here which relate to bank finance, in relation to funding of development, in relation to housing demand. We had a rise last year, of course, in terms of the interest in Tasmania from interstate and international buyers. Interstate buyers can't even come here at the moment. International buyers can't come even to the country. Let's look at this, and I agree it's an issue, but let's not come to a conclusion, and let's not, for heaven's sakes, try to come to a conclusion tonight. This is an issue which wisely and rightly is put towards the Economic Development, the Finance Committee, and committees that are charged with monitoring and reporting back to Council. And Lord Mayor, this is a multifaceted issue, not deserving of being sheeted back to one cause. So let's accept the statistics tonight and move on, because slanging off about whether it's this or that cause is not going to help us, because there's no experts around this table in terms of the multifaceted nature of this problem. It is a problem, and it will continue, as Alderman Briscoe said, to be a problem. Now, when it becomes a problem that affects our rates income, and remembering that even though we don't specifically include an increase in the long-term financial management plan in terms of revenue. We have year on year, and particularly with the hotel developments, had a 3% year-on-year increase. And that's obviously at risk. It's at risk all around the country. So I think let's accept it as a serious issue. Let's accept it as an issue for this council to show leadership to develop an action plan and then take it further forward in the future council.
Thank you, Alderman Thomas. Very sensible, moderate comments. Any other discussion on this? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I totally endorse the points made by Alderman Thomas. I think, to simply emphasize one particular aspect is not really a realistic way of looking at it. There's so many other factors that contribute to this. And I would also say that, as a elected member, we do want to encourage and be positive about developments, etc. But our hands are tied when it comes to the application. We need to put it under the planning scheme. And if I, in my discretion, think it doesn't fit, I won't vote for it. That's my position. And I'm sure others will do the same.
Thanks, Councillor Dutta. Any further discussion? Okay. Yeah, I think sometimes there might be confusion or mixing up of planning approvals and building approvals. This is our building approvals. And so these might be things that we approved as a planning authority a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. So the building approvals pipeline is really in someone else's hands through the private building process and regulated by the state government. So this is, obviously an indication of activity in our city, but not really a reflection of recent planning authority decisions, of which I'd just like to highlight there's been quite a large number of planning applications in the last year. And in fact, it's almost hardly any difference between the year before and certainly well up on years previous, because we all know that that Hobart is a very desirable place to live, and there's lots and lots of applications coming from people who want to live here, and they want to live here because it is unique and it's kept its character, and it's a very livable city. And the more that we can do to follow our planning scheme and promote livability and good public spaces and good governance, and an interesting, thriving city, we are not going to have a problem with people wanting to live in Hobart. I'm very confident there's going to be a lot more people wanting to live here after this COVID experience. So I'll just see if anyone would like to vote against receiving and noting our building statistics.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, am I able to sum up?
If you feel that's necessary.
I'd
We do it. Do we normally do it with we do it with all of them, don't we? I thought it was
Yes,
just
Lord Mayor.
Yes, Alderman Barakis, if you could sum up, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And Lord Mayor, I'm glad that you brought up the difference between development applications and building permits, because I think that does actually speak to a concern that's been raised with me on numerous occasions, and it's one that I've raised, I think, once or twice recently, that just because things are getting approved by the council doesn't mean they're being built. And I think on surface level, that might sound like suppose almost like handball, that it's not the council's fault. But one of the things that has been raised is that to get things approved by this council, sometimes there does seem to be the need to butter down, going from, if a development wants to be 12.
Alderman Barakis, can you sum up, please, rather than introducing new material, please?
Well, Lord Mayor, I'm just speaking to the topic.
Sum up, please.
Say again?
Just sum up the points that were made in the discussion.
Well, I'm actually addressing one of your points that you raised.
Well, that's introducing new material. Anyway, just sum up, please.
A point of order, not Lord Mayor. It's not introducing new material.
Alderman Zuko, I can't see you. Are you in this meeting?
The General Manager is well aware I'm in this meeting. Ask the General Manager.
General Manager, I just can't see Alderman Zuko, so.
No.
Shall we-
I've sent a note out to elected members to indicate that whilst you can't see him, he is still present.
Okay. All right, Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Barakis, please. If
Thank
can-
you. I just indicate that just because there is a difference between DAs.
Lord Mayor, we're getting a lot of feedback because you've left your mic on. I just sent a message out a moment ago. I wonder if you could turn your mic off when others speak. Thanks.
Okey doke.
Yeah, just trying to do that, sorry.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, look, I won't touch on that too long because I think that's possibly a broader conversation, but I think it's something that we should all be mindful of. And I will note the what was raised by Alderman Thomas, and I don't necessarily think that, I don't disagree with what he was saying, and I think there is a broad range of reasons why the building statistics might be down from previous years. And I will just note, and I'm happy to circulate this to anybody who might want it, that, you know, whilst there obviously has been the broader economic reasons for things being down for some parts of the year, from the last financial year up to July 2020, I will just note some of the statistics that were circulated by Clarence Council, that the annual development growth in Clarence was 30.9%, Glenorchy was 20.8%, and Hobart was 6.1%.
Point of order. Now, isn't this new information? I understand that it should be summarized. It's not another go at having another spill at it.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor. Alderman Barakis, if you wouldn't mind just quickly summing up rather than introducing new material, which perhaps you could introduce when you introduce the item.
All I'm doing here is responding to things that have been said during the debate. Lord Mayor. I'm happy to move on from that. And I'll just note that, you know, in response to Alderman Thomas, yes, there have been some broader economic conditions that have led to a decrease, but the information that is publicly available does indicate that Hobart has performed differently to other councils, and we are down compared to other councils. So that information does actually speak to that. And in regards to, you know, the potential statistics implying a erosion of our rates and the council's financial position, it was a mayor of a meeting with a mayor in a northern council who might have, I don't know, might have a different understanding of economic development to some in Hobart. But, you know, he said effectively when it comes to economic development, there's two ways to do it. You can either raise the rates for people or you raise the rates base. And I think what we should be encouraging is more development and appropriate development, and we should be doing it to raise the rate base of our city.
Point of order. Again.
Councillor Dutta.
It's not new information. I'm responding.
Just wait, Alderman Barakis, while I hear the point of order. Councillor Dutta.
New information, unless I have been deaf.
The Lord Mayor did make a point about increasing the population.
And as did Alderman Thomas about the rates. So I'm just addressing what's been said, Councillor.
Unless I'm in a different meeting.
I think we're getting close to time. Alderman Barakis, if you wouldn't mind just finishing your summing up, please.
I was actually getting
Stick to your guns, Alderman Barakis. You're doing it well.
Sorry.
Well, thank you, Alderman Zuko. Look,
Alderman Barakis, you're doing well.
Could I ask that Alderman stop interjecting and just let Alderman...
Yes, it'd be good if Alderman Dutta stopped interjecting.
Alderman Zuko, stop interjecting, please, and let Alderman Barakis finish his summing up. Let's move on.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I'll be very brief in finishing up. I think the statistics just should be seen as an eye-opener. I think we do need to start looking at our priorities when we start considering development and considering economic development in our city. I don't think that they're two things in isolation of one another. Beyond that, I'll leave it there.
Okay, moving on to item 12 is the Finance and Governance Committee. Alderman Zuko.
Lord Mayor, do we need to put that?
Lord Mayor.
Okay. Would anyone like to vote against receiving and noting our building statistics? Please raise your hand. Alderman Briscoe, your hand's raised. Are you voting against this? No. Okay, it's passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item number 12, Finance and Governance Committee, Alderman Zuko.
It'll be Alderman Sexton, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Sexton.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. I just move the item that the council continue its annual membership of the Tasmanian Pollen Network to be funded from the Economic Development Function. The Tasmanian Pollen Network is the peak Antarctic and Southern Ocean sector industry body in Tasmania, and it comprises a group of businesses, scientific organisations and government. It employs over 750 people. It runs festivals that can attract up to 12,000 people at a time, and it contributes wages of about $70 million. The membership fee, as I understand, is about $330. So it's a very small amount of money to remain a member of a very important organisation, and I endorse it, the recommendation, Lord Mayor.
Okay, that's seconded by Councillor Sherlock. Alderman Thomas, did you have something you want to say?
I was just going to second it, that's all.
Okay, Alderman Barakis, did you want to say something?
Oh, thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll be really brief. I just think it needs to be said that, you know, given the current situation we find the council in, the financial position, I think it's the right thing to do for us to provide ask the questions every single time these come up. Are these things that we should be continuing to pay to remain in and continuing to take part in? However, I think after having looked at that and asked those questions, I think the small amount of money that we pay and the potential return that we do get from this, I think it's obviously and clearly a beneficial thing for the city to be a part in, and I'm definitely supportive of us remaining in this.
Okay, is there no further discussion? No further discussion. I will see if anyone would like to vote against this. Okay, there's no one against. That's passed unanimously. We're now moving on to the Parks and Recreation Committee. I'll invite Alderman Briscoe to introduce these items.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I move the item, Harrington Street former public toilet site. We need a second.
Councillor Sherlock.
Look, very briefly, the Harrington public toilets were formerly constructed over the Hobart Rivulet near the corner of Liverpool Street. Following its demolition, consideration was given to the future of the site, and options were investigated, but for varying reasons, as outlined in the committee report, it was recommended the removal of the remnant slab and installation of an improved barrier at the heritage wall to allow public viewing of the open rivulet be considered in a future year of the capital works program. It is quite expensive to remove that remnant slab, so it will be considered in a future. That's all I wish to say.
Okay, any discussion? There's no discussion on this item, so I'll see if anyone would like to vote against the recommendation. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, there's no raised hand, so that's passed unanimously. Item 14, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Again, I move the motion, item 14.
Seconded by Councillor Sherlock.
Yes, just very briefly, Lord Mayor. Lensdale Crescent Primary School has occupied a section of the city's West Hobart recreation ground since 1977, and it's been formalised by a licence agreement in 2014. The licence area predominantly includes the school, kindergarten, playground. A grant has allowed the Department of Education to commission new buildings and landscaping works at the school that allows for improved landscaping and connectivity across the steep site involving the city's recreational ground area. It's proposed that the council approve an expansion of the licence footprint and approve the landscape plan for the licence area. And as the report indicates, all works will be funded and undertaken by the school to the satisfaction of the city. It is only a small increase, but it allows some really nice landscaping. If you look at the report, you can see the diagrams. That's all I wish to say, Lord Mayor.
Any discussion on this item? No one would like to speak, so I'll put that and see if anyone would like to vote against this proposal. Okay, there's no raised hands. That's passed unanimously. That's the end of the items in our closed agenda, open agenda. Would someone like to move that we move into our closed portion? That's moved by Alderman Barakis, seconded by Alderman Briscoe. Would anyone like to vote against moving into the closed? There's no objection, so therefore that's passed unanimously. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll now move